Hey Diane, welcome to the Value Driven Marketing Podcast. So good to catch up with you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Hey, how has it been?
Yeah,
How's the summer for you?
going good. Time is flying. I feel like I blinked and like 6 months have passed, but like everyone when you're working in business. But yeah, doing really well. How about you?
Yeah, I also feel time is flying, but just trying to, do as much as I can and just be more compassionate with myself when things don't go the way I plan,
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah, definitely. And as we were saying before, trying to create a manageable workload, not do a million things in one day.
Exactly. Then, before we go into the juicy stuff and talk about messaging and messaging strategy, there's a question that I actually like to ask every guest. And it's a bit more personal, but I feel it kind of helps me get to know you a little bit better. I think it's also fun. And I'm very curious to learn what was your dream job as a child? So, what did you hope to become when you grow
Hmm.
up?
Yeah, so I had different dream jobs depending on what age, depending on what age I was. Like I had these phases of childhood. I think the earliest thing I can remember wanting to be was a singer or a pop star, which is like just very classic me, if you know me, just like wanting to be the center of attention and be on a stage. And I actually used to do I've always done singing, so I've always sang in choirs when I was at school. So I started like
Cool.
6, 7 years old. I was always in the gospel choir. And not many people know I was actually in a band at university for a very short period of
I had
time.
no clue.
So I've actually performed on stage. So I guess I could say I've kind of ticked it off. But I wanted to be like, like Destiny's Child or something. I wanted to be Beyonce when I was like 7. Um, and then as I got older, my dream jobs shifted. And I remember I wanted to be a lawyer when I was like 11 because I thought it would make me a load of money and I could just stand and argue in court. And I thought that would be great. Yeah, so those are probably the jobs that I wanted when I was a kid.
That's interesting and super cool that you actually get to tick off one of them. So
Yeah,
yeah, job
kind
done.
of. Not really, honestly. Not really. I performed like once or twice. I've sang
Well, that's on the
I've sang at a few
bucket list.
weddings though. I have sang at a few weddings.
Cool. That's nice. It's good to know actually. Oh, awesome. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. I would like to kind of start from the beginning. What is messaging and what messaging is not? Because I find that there tends to be some confusion sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's start with the obvious, like the elephant in the room, because I think many people confuse messaging with copywriting. So,
Hmm.
messaging is definitely not the same as copywriting. Messaging is really what you say about your product, your service, your solution. And then copywriting comes in and is how you say that message. So, the way that I see messaging is really the foundation of your kind of whole marketing strategy. It's really the foundation for strong, effective copywriting. Um, and it's really based on and informed by your unique positioning in the market, right? It's
Hmm.
informed
Hmm.
by your company mission, who you are as a company and what you do and your values. So, the way that I approach messaging is it's a process where you really identify the most essential things about your product, your service, and why that matters to your audience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's a very good intro. And do you find that there are specific things that SaaS and B2B companies need to take before they go in and say, okay, I need to overhaul, for example, my messaging? Are there specific elements that they need to already have in place, or a process that they need to go through before they say, okay, I'm ready to, start crafting my messaging?
Mm. Well, I think that you need to have a solid grasp of firstly where messaging comes into play, and you
Mm-hmm.
do definitely need to have a few pieces in place already. So I like to think, if we kind of visualize a pyramid, right? If you visualize the pyramid and envision the bottom layer as just strategy, like your overall business strategy, your marketing strategy, then on top of that you have another layer that is your positioning, and then on top of that messaging sits on top of that, and then copy on the top. And so really,
Mm-hmm.
if we consider that as this kind of framework, and I think that image is probably floating around the internet somewhere, like if you want to work on your messaging but your positioning doesn't make any sense and is shoddy, your messaging will not work. So I think that's the most important thing, and just having a clear strategy as a business and having a clear understanding of your positioning. That's what I require anyway when I work with clients. Obviously, you can work on your positioning and messaging together, and they shift, right? Nothing stays the same. But to get your messaging right, you have to know where you sit in the market, what you offer that's different, why you, and you have to know your customers and your ideal audience like inside out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So definitely have the strategy, figure out the positioning, knowing your customers, because that will help you be able to actually craft messaging that works. And I think I'm really curious to learn what do you think about good messaging? So what does good messaging sound or feel like?
Mm. So good messaging, I think, is really different depending on each company. I don't think there is one really good example of what messaging should feel like, because of everything I just mentioned, right? Because it's based on your, you know, your unique positioning in the market, who you target and who you are. Essentially, just based on that, if you have an enterprise B2B software company versus, and I know we're talking about B2B here, but if we talk about like B2C, real kind of innovative, disruptive, like product based market, good messaging is going to look different. But a few things I think we need to look for is that, one, clarity, right? Good messaging should be clear, because
Mm-hmm.
clarity is the basis of everything, right? If we don't understand what it is that you're trying to express or present or put forward about your company, like, we can't get to the next stage. Um, Two, it needs to be really easy to understand. Um, Messaging is really about remembering the most important things. What are the key concepts, the key themes, the key things that I need to know about your company and your product. And in order to do that, you have to simplify. Like, you cannot create, this super complex messaging strategy, because it's not going to work. Um, and then I think the third thing I would say is that it really needs to be relevant. And again, that's because messaging is created around like the needs of your audience, um, and it should be based on research as well. So you have to create relevant messaging, not just messaging that leadership or the CMO likes. So yeah, clear, easy to understand, relevant, but that will look completely different depending on your company and your product.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think getting to a place where you simplify, I imagine that's quite a challenge, because sometimes I think it's very tempting to want to say everything in one go, and we're this and this and this, and we cannot give up anything. So maybe how do you find this process, or how do you help people decide what's more important and just to keep them focused?
Yeah, it's funny. I just came off a call with a client of mine where we were I presented part of the new kind of messaging strategy that we're working on, and one of the conversations that we had during that call was, yeah, we need to simplify. We need to reduce. We're on like the first iteration, and we've simplified a lot because they're a B2B marketing platform. Um, that does a lot of things. It does a lot of things for a lot of customers, and so there's a million things that they're talking about. And so we've already done that first like cull of what's the most important for your customers. What are the things that you can own? How can you stand out from everyone else? But we're still like trying to refine that further. We're still trying to look at um, the really unique parts of their offering, and simplify. And it's always the part that I come up against challenges with. Um, I always say that to my clients. I say that you have to get comfortable with like being uncomfortable, because we're gonna have some uncomfortable moments where you want to say everything, and we have to remember what it is that we're trying to do with messaging is be remembered and be known for the right thing and cut through all of the noise. And you can't do that when you're trying to say too much.
If good messaging is clear, is relevant, focused, on the flip side, what is the negative impact that bad messaging can have on a business?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think there are two like big culprits that I see and problems with
Mm-hmm.
kind of bad messaging. And one of them we mentioned already, right? So definitely too many messages is the classic. Um, and really that leads to confusion. It leads to confused prospects, and confused prospects don't buy, right? So
Yeah.
um, what you really need to do is kind of refine what it is that you're all about, and leave a couple of core messages that your prospects like need to think of, or remember when they think of you. One of the biggest problems that I see, particularly with the clients that I work with, is that they want to say everything, or they have a solution with so many benefits, so many features, and they just can't pull things back, and they can't pair them back, and they want to talk about everything. And that just leads to confused prospects. So that's, I think, the first one and the main one. um, and I think the second thing, and really kind of the symptom of what bad messaging looks like, is just sameness, right? And I think that this one is,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the B2B world, um, really something that we all need to fight against, right? Fight against just sounding exactly the same as everyone else, saying the well, saying the exact things like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because really, there's no way to differentiate from anyone else. There's no, you really need to be answering the question, like, why should I pick you? And if you're saying the same thing and offering the same benefits and the same core messages as everyone else, you don't stand out. you know I think this year, 2022, the latest Martech report was released, I think back in March or something like that. And I work primarily with like marketing technology companies, and there were 9,000 plus like tools on the market.
Whoa.
Even just email service
Overwhelming.
yeah, it's overwhelming. It's crazy. Email service providers. There are like 700 plus tools that people can choose from. And so really, right now you cannot be lazy and just sit and say the same things. Deliver better email. What does that mean? Right? You have to really get granular, and you have to really fight that sameness and get specific. So yeah, I think those are the two kind of real negative impacts, and those are just the two key culprits that everyone kind of falls into the trap.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And for a business that has several products, or different type of services, so they have already a complex business. Do you find that they need to go in and create different messaging for each different line of business, so they go away from trying to say it all in one go?
Yeah, so this is a challenge that I'm starting to see a little bit more frequently. Depending on the complexity of the product or the solution. And I think that there are different layers to messaging, and that's how I approach it. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, when it comes to specific customers or buyer personas, if you want to call them that, although I have a bugbear with personas, but we won't talk about it because we need a whole hour to talk about that. But in terms of your ideal client, persona, people who are buying from you, different products, of course, you need to talk about the different elements of those. But I do think when we look at this from a higher level, right, the stage above that, you still need to have a clear messaging strategy at the company level, right? At the high,
Mm-hmm.
if you're one company that has two separate products, you still need to be able to say very clearly, in a very easy to understand way, in a very relevant way, who you are and what you do and why I should care, right? And so, what I do when I come in and work with companies is, okay, sure, you've got these different personas, you've got all of these things. That's later. Let's start at the top. Let's pare things back. Let's build a core messaging strategy. Let's create some key messaging pillars, the things that you can own that actually will cut through to everyone, right? Because there must be
Mm-hmm.
something that you offer, that you do, that means something to all of your customers. And then you can start getting granular throughout. But really, messaging it's what is relevant, what is interesting about what you do, why should I care? And then you kind of start building it underneath, okay, the proof points, the evidence, the features, all of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And talking about everyone sounding the same, um, you know, I guess it is a challenge to differentiate yourself and find that point that makes you different, or take a stand that's radically different from everyone else. And I guess my question is for companies that have a hard time differentiating themselves. Do you find that you can help them craft their messaging, or is it that they need to go in first, find an angle, and then work on messaging?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't think differentiation, and we're starting to talk a little bit more about differentiation in itself is just kind of one piece, isn't it? And that's a whole, like, you can spend a long time just looking for that differentiation. But I don't think you need to be radical. Like, not every, let's be honest, not every
Hmm.
B2B product, business, service business, like software can't be
Is so
radical.
unique.
Like, you don't have to sit on the complete edge of the map in order to stand out. What The way that I like to approach differentiation is, again, and this is everything, always comes back to your customers and your market, is for this one small group of people, right? The people that, and looking at your existing customer base, the people that love what you do, the early adopters, the people that are getting the most out of your solution, for that small group of people, like, what is it that you do differently and why do they care? And sometimes your differentiation might seem boring off the face of it, but it's what makes you different. And that's why you will stand out from other competitors, or it's a mix of these different things, right? It's a mix of, for this specific group of people in this area of the market, you offer this small thing that benefits them in a different way to someone else. And that it doesn't always have to be radical. Obviously, building in and having a strong point of view about something and some change, that's very
Hmm.
important. And that's the type of work that I do when we're actually looking at the strategic narrative. I think that every company needs to think about having a strategic narrative and looking at how their company or their product sits in the wider context of the world, right? In a bigger shift, like, what story? Why should I come along with you? And I could pick so many other people. But really, your differentiation, again, it doesn't have to be radical, I don't think.
Okay, so you touched a good point here. Okay, makes sense. Diane, let's talk a little bit about the process. So, can you share what is your process for crafting a messaging strategy? From A to Z. I do know a little bit from following you on LinkedIn. I know customer research is super important in your process, but can you walk me step by step?
Yeah, sure. So I follow, for every kind of messaging strategy engagement, similar to, the work that I have done previously on copywriting projects as well. I follow a 4-step process. So research, opportunity, assembly, and review. So it's raw, ROAR, raw, like a lion. Um, and really, that's essentially it. You start with research and discovery, and that usually involves consulting sessions, right? So we're going to sit down, have a strategy session to really unpack the challenges with your messaging so far, to really unpack your positioning, where you sit, and do a real deep dive into the current, like, business ecosystem and what's going on now. Researching the competitive landscape as well, because this is also important for the next step. um,
Mm-hmm.
and really understanding everything about your product and your current marketing, etc. For me, as an outside consultant, this is a really deep dive phase, because I have to kind of get up to speed and look at what you're doing, what you're not doing, and completely kind of catch up with who you are and what you and where you sit in the market. um, and then moving into kind of opportunity. Oh, sorry, actually, let me finish phase one. So this is why it's so huge. Like, research and discovery actually takes up probably like 70% of every messaging strategy project. So within research and
Wow.
discovery is like customer interviews, right? So that's kind of like the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's really incredibly important, because what we're looking for is a voice of customer language. So we're doing voice of customer research. I generally hold interviews. We can do surveys as well, online review mining, and looking at the competitive landscape. But really, you want to start asking questions that will uncover insights about your customers, about their desires, their needs, why they work with you, what's been working so far with your messaging, and really just digging deeper to the whole kind of marketing strategy. Um, and then the next thing is that opportunity. So once we've done all of that, what is the opportunity, like unpacking the data, synthesizing all of our ideas and all the brainstorming, and starting to pull together some ideas, and opportunities for you as a company to stand out, some messages that perhaps are constantly being repeated by your customers that you haven't looked into, maybe opportunities
Mm-hmm.
of things that you need to stop mentioning because they're not actually relevant or they're not clear anymore. And then the last phase is assembly. So really pulling those ideas together. So that's where we iterate, have those discussions, revisions, brainstorm, and actually pull all of those ideas into a clear, cohesive messaging strategy. So, for example, for me, every project will be different with every client. But one of the core things that I always make sure that we build out is looking at who we are, right? So starting some internally on,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's the mission and the vision, and that's really important stuff, right, to guide any company. I think brand messaging and those brand pieces often get a bad rep. But knowing your mission and what it is and why everyone is turning up to work every single day and what you're building is incredibly important for all those other things that you layer on top. So we always look at kind of who you are, why you're doing what you do, and then what you say. So I always help companies kind of build out key messaging pillars. So then they have a core messaging framework to build on in their copy. And then that last step was review. So obviously kind of reviewing that and testing that, and that's ongoing, that step, like it never ends, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
once you've created a messaging strategy, it's not completely done, and you kind of need to consistently review that and test it with your customers, because they'll be the ones that tell you if it's actually working or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in terms of testing, do you have any recommendations? How can a SaaS company go about testing their messaging? Just figure out, I'm on the right track. This is, messages that this messaging actually makes sense and it's clear, and my customers get it and they're like, uh-huh.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's funny because the interesting thing about messaging is the first people, or the first like KPI, is generally just the internal team getting it or agreeing. Like, you'll be surprised how many companies I work with,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the key problems is just like we're not aligned. We're not aligned internally. We're all saying
Mm.
different things. We're not happy with our messaging. We know it inside and out, but we don't feel like it really does us justice. It's not relevant. So one of the first things, and the first things that I'm looking for is like from the CEO, the founder, the leadership team, and marketing, like, is this, are you happy with this? Like, does this clearly state what it is that you do, so that you can kind of completely back this and then kind of share it throughout the company. So there are kind of internal, and maybe like non-tangible KPIs that I kind of start with, and then in terms of kind of testing that and putting that out in the market, there are a few different ways, right? One thing, particularly with more sales led companies, is starting to hear that messaging being repeated back to you, right? And so this is something
Mm-hmm.
that takes a little bit longer, but when you're, the most immediate feedback loop is having conversations with people using this messaging and then hearing that back and knowing that it resonates. That's the kind of quick and easiest way. And then obviously once you kind of implement messaging, turning that into copywriting, putting that on your site, then it's all of the classic kind of KPIs and metrics and conversions that we're looking for, right? Are we getting more page on time? Sorry, more time on the page? Are we getting more conversions? Are we getting more signups? Are we getting more demos? Like, the same way that you would for the rest of your marketing strategy. But I think it's just that, interestingly enough, for messaging, you also need to kind of look wider, and kind of test in different ways as well.
Mm-hmm. And maybe give it some time before jumping to conclusions. So just test it with enough clients, give it enough time to figure out whether this is uh, we're in the right path, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely takes time. You definitely need to let things settle and sink in. And particularly with messaging, you need to repeat it over and over again, right? You need to just, in order for something to stick and be memorable, you can't just say something once.
Yeah.
You need to just hammer this home. And that's when you start to kind of reap the benefits as well.
Mm-hmm. And I find this personally, I find this very challenging because I feel like repeating yourself or repeating myself is boring. Like I'm going to bore people to death. But I guess you're right. Like you have to repeat the message in order to stick, because there's so much noise out there. So you do need to repeat it. That's a very good point.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where building a messaging strategy comes into play and helps you, because messaging is really what. So now we know what you need to be talking about. We have the clear message, the clear point of view, and then copywriting. There's so many different ways you can say the same message, right? So you can repeat yourself in 10
Mm-hmm.
different ways for different channels, for different audiences, but you're saying the same thing. And companies that do this really well are the ones that, when you think of a company, you think of a product, you can, like, you have these key messages, these key thoughts that come to mind because they've said it over and over again. It doesn't mean repeating one phrase. What it means is kind of
Mm-hmm.
repeating one message in different ways, in different formats, so that it really gets through.
Mm-hmm. So it's the idea that you're repeating not the same phrase, essentially.
Exactly. Just the same message.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Diane, I'm also curious to learn, do you find there's a specific time in the life of a SaaS or a B2B tech company when they're best positioned to work with an external consultant on their messaging?
Yeah, so what I see personally is that clients usually come to me when they're going through a growth shift, right? So either something's
Mm-hmm.
happening or it's about to happen, and that's when I can generally come in and best help a company. So it could be, if we talk about B2B SaaS, right, funding. So we've just secured like a Series A and we're about to expand, or you've got like one marketing leader or a small team, but actually now you want to build out a content team, a copy team. I find that messaging, who's been maybe the founder or one person, and now you need to spread that throughout the company as you grow. That's a really crucial, integral part of, like, you need to get your messaging strategy right there, because the more people that you put in, if there's no clear direction, they don't really know, everyone starts saying different things, it's really hard to come back from that. So that
Mm-hmm.
kind of growth stage is usually where I come in and have most impact. Um, and there can be a different growth shift, right? It's not just about funding, like I said, but about growing a new product line. um I think those are probably like the key areas. But really, like messaging, I always think that we always talk about getting product market fit, but we never talk about getting message market fit. And you have to have
Mm-hmm.
one before the other. So for example, if you're way too early, if you're like beta testing or you're pre-revenue, you haven't really got a product on the market yet, or you're very new, like getting someone in to kind of build out your messaging strategy is too early. Like you really need to, at that point, it's better for the founding team or whoever it is to just lead this themselves and champion it, because you're the person who knows this best. Once you have strong, clear product market fit, you're scaling, you're growing, this is usually a really good indication that, okay, what's worked, what's worked and we know why, but what's worked up until now probably won't help you get to the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so now you can start talking to customers, getting feedback, iterating, and improving. Because now what it is like, okay, now we're a fully functioning business. Um, what is it that's going to make us stand out? And how can we really get a stake in the market and become the solution for whatever the product? So that's usually
Mm-hmm.
where I think you'll get the best out of working with someone external.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a time and a place, and a shift in growth is that time. But also be cautious not to go
Yeah,
in too soon,
exactly. Yeah, I would
like
say
when
so. I
before
mean,
you have product market fit.
let's be honest,
Mm-hmm.
messaging is never a priority for like startup founders. Like, let's be honest, like it's the reality. Like, it doesn't hurt me. Like, it's just the truth,
Mm-hmm.
because you have like a million things to do. You're talking like messaging is important then, right? And you need to get your copy right. But I'm talking about like really building a solid messaging, a strategy, a foundation, to do this like deep work. It's better for, you can do this internally. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but to bring in a consultant really early on to build out a messaging strategy, this is kind of, I think this is stuff that you can probably do internally. You can handle internally. And there's probably a better use of your resources.
Mm-hmm.
So, build this yourself, iterate, listen, get the feedback. You have the tools. If you have customers, you're doing beta, you're working with your first clients, then do those custom interviews yourself, and you'll get, the answers will be right in front of you. But then at some point, once that's clear, then it's better to work with someone external, I think.
Awesome. Then I do have one final question. So, what would be your top recommendations for CEOs, founders, or marketing leaders who are unsure if their messaging is the right one and the relevant one for their audience? So, what would be your top advice?
That's a really tricky question. That's a really,
A
really tough
short one.
question. Yeah, okay. What would be my advice? So I'm not sure. So, if you're unsure if your current messaging is the right one. So firstly, if you're unsure, there probably isn't.
Mhm.
Like, let's be honest. If you have some doubts personally, when what you're selling and you know it inside out, and you don't think that your current messaging is doing you justice, generally you've outgrown your messaging. So it sounds like you're already at that stage where you know it doesn't fit. So then, if you're not sure, then you're probably right. Um, a good place to start, right? I think is message testing. And you can use tools to do this and to help you. So you can use platforms to do message testing surveys, and you can also do this yourself, right? So asking people, sharing your messaging, getting feedback from your target audience, not just everyone,
Mhm.
although it does help as well to kind of ask anyone, but try and pass that first clarity test. Like, do people get it? Do people care? You perform surveys or do kind of 5-second tests, or like full user tests where people interact with your site and see what they feel. And I think that's a good place to start, so you can start getting feedback. Were you right? If you were unsure, is everyone saying the same thing? Is there things that they don't understand? And then you'll know where to target and what next step you should take.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds very good. This has been a pleasure, Diane. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas, your insights, and I definitely had a great time chatting to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you, Diane.